Steve, you know what I realized? I realized we need a theme song. Like every time we're here trying to figure out what the heck or how the heck to start off these podcasts, and it's usually something like, "Yo, that was crazy," or "What did we just watch?" or "We're back," something like that. I'm like, I've been thinking about it. I'm like, I think we need a theme song. Most podcasts, maybe they talk for 20 seconds at the beginning and then it fades and does the intro song or whatever. Some just start right off with it. I think we could use one. I think we could use one. And I'm not musically talented enough to make one. That's for sure.
Oh, I fully agree with you. I think we could definitely use a theme song to start off our shows. I also agree with you that neither of us is musically talented enough to pull that off. And if I try to make one up, it would definitely just be something that I've heard from memory and plagiarize off somebody else subconsciously. Yeah. So anybody out there that wants to write us some goofy little theme song, Justin will pay you $5 to do it.
I will. I will.
Least.
Email me, hit me in the email. Do we have an email up there? Our email is not on anything. You can DM us on Instagram. I think that's the only link that's on our Spotify links.
Yes.
But hit us on the Instagram DMs if you are interested. I will pay $5 whole when I get back from South Africa. And it will be good. We're starting a business. We got employees soon. We're gonna have our first employee. Man, this is the start, and then a year from now we have editors and producers, and we have the whole shebang, the whole production team. So gotta start small.
Celebrity guests.
Exactly. Maybe we'll have Tom Hiddleston on at that point, right in time for season 2. Who knows? But man, Loki, the finale. It's sad saying that. It's really sad saying that. Like I was enjoying this show so much. I'm so sad that it's over. But what a way to go out. My goodness. What a way to go out.
Yeah, let's cut right to it. This was, by all of my standards, an amazing finale. Again, a little bit bittersweet. I'm with you, as I've gotten used to these weekly releases for the Marvel shows, and the gaps in between them are grating, to say the least. It's tough waiting week to week for each subsequent episode, but it's even tougher in these interim times when there's a month and a half until the next show comes out. Mm-hmm. Now, What If is actually coming out in less than a month by the time that we're recording this, so it seems like the whinings of a spoiled brat to say, I would need more Marvel now. But, I mean, gotta be honest, that's how I feel. Mm-hmm. They're knocking it out of the park with all their shows so far, and feels greedy, but I just want more. I want to see where this story goes and how far it continues. And I think they've set themselves up supremely well here with this finale in Loki. And the implications of which are, I'm still trying to process exactly what this means for everything going forward. But now, it's not to say it was a perfect episode. We both did have a couple issues with it, as we'll get into here, but we'll then follow up with a much longer and in-depth breakdown of what we enjoyed and our good thoughts on the episode. But Justin, you wanted to start off with just some slight nitpicking.
Yeah, just wanted to hop into the issues that I had with this episode because they are so few, and I wanted to get them out of the way, get past them, and focus on the immense amount, just the mountain-sized amazingness of this episode. So right off the bat, this was, I don't know if it was my favorite episode of the series, because as a singular episode, like with respect to the series itself, it was not necessarily the most exciting. Where, like, for instance, if this was just a show on its own and it was not connected to a greater universe, I think this would not have been the most exciting episode. I think that would have been last week's or maybe even week 2. But the fact that it is just carrying so many massive implications for the future and for the MCU, it just was so exciting and so fantastic to watch. And see, I was supposed to talk about stuff that I didn't love about it, and I already am having a hard time doing it. So let me center and focus and just talk about a few things that I did not love, and you can give your thoughts on them so that way we can transition quickly to just the incredible parts of this episode. The main issues that I had with this episode were with respect to what I thought had been some of the strongest points of this series up till now, which was Sylvie and Loki and their relationship. First of all, the whole romance thing I thought was just weird and gross, and also not even really necessary to the plot. It seemed like they kind of just wanted to add that in for the sake of having it. Like, they very easily could have just had them learn to like love each other in the sense of teammates and coming together and actually being able to trust people. There's totally an easy way to do that without bringing romance into it. And so that was just weird and forced. And also just they had been hinting at it the last few episodes, and I was hoping that they didn't do that. They kiss in this episode, and I let out an audible when that happened, just knowing that they're the same person. It's like, people will try to justify it by saying, oh, it's Loki, he only cares about himself. Of course he would love himself. But the whole point of the series was him like growing to not be such a selfish prick the whole time. Like, the whole point of the show was him maturing and learning to care about other people. And so, even if you take that premise that like he can only fall in love with himself, then that totally blows all of his character development. And so that was just their whole romance thing, which I know wasn't just this episode. That whole thing I was not a fan of. And also just Sylvie, when they have the conversation, when Kang, or he who remains, the variant of Kang that we see here, when he tells them the whole situation, and Loki's literally just like, let's stop and think about it for a minute. He's like to Sylvie, you might be right, but it wouldn't hurt to think about it for a minute. And she immediately just loses all of her character development by saying, oh, you just want the throne for yourself, like, yada yada, you're trying to stop me. And all of her thing, like, there's literally a line where Loki says, I can't be, or you can't trust, and I can't be trusted. And like, they've repeated this before, but the whole point of their arcs during the show was to grow past that. And then immediately in this 1 second, all of her character development just completely collapses. Which I understand that this is her entire life of being traumatized and followed and hunted down and in total isolation. Like, that has all led to this point. And so I totally understand the anger and the desire to kill Kang. Like, I totally understand that motivation. Like, I don't think she's really out of line for, or I don't think it's out of her character for her to have that mentality. But for her to immediately then turn to Loki and say, oh, you must want the throne because you're not telling me not to, you're telling me just to wait and think about it for a minute. Like, that just seemed, because then it seemed like he was just accepting, you can't trust and I can't be trusted. And it's like, their whole growth through this whole series was to be able to trust and be trusted. And that was just immediately thrown out the window, which for me was I'm like, well, then what was the whole point of them learning to do these things? And so that part.
If I can just cut in here real quick.
Yeah, maybe I'm way off.
I
Maybe I'm way off, but that was how I perceived it.
I don't want to say you're way off, but I do have to disagree with you here on Sylvie. Firstly, I'll concede that Sylvie, for me, was one of the weaker points of the episode. She was supremely annoying and made a very stupid decision. But I don't think that it was out of character. I think it was perfectly in character for her to do what she did. Her entire life has been on the run, trying to be free from something that has been predetermined for her from the jump. Like, her existence was supposed to be wiped out. She shouldn't have been able to, like have a free will beforehand. And she spent hundreds, I'm assuming thousands of years fighting to get to, the point where we see her in the story when she gets introduced earlier in the show. And then she and Loki, finally make it to the Timekeepers, and she kills them only to find out that they're fake and there's somebody else behind them. And so, they go through, she gets pruned, she goes through the void, and they fight through Eliath, they enchant Eliath, and make it all the way to the end, to find He Who Remains, only to find out that them getting there has been planned out from the beginning as well. Like, he wanted them to get to that spot. Like he said, he paved the road for everything they did, and they just walked down it. So, in that situation, like, she's basically at her wit's end. Like, she has been on the run her entire life and just trying to take authority over her own life, essentially. And it's all for naught. At this point, she doesn't even care the implications of what happened, as a result of her decision. But she's just so frustrated and takes He Who Remains out. I mean, yeah, it does turn out to be a pretty stupid decision. And yeah, this reminds me of Infinity War, where the gang on Titan has Thanos, under Mantis mind control, and they're working on getting the gauntlet off, and Quill starts punching him in the face. Obviously, that was a very stupid call. And Infinity War has the caveat that, you can justify whatever happened by Doctor Strange's criticism-proof line saying that only 1 out of 14 million futures has them winning, so this has to be the way it happened. I mean, that was another situation where a character had everything that they worked for, like, ripped from them, and reacted emotionally, which, is very stupid and not a logical decision to make. But characters acting emotionally aren't acting logically, and I think that is in character for her to do. And we see after, actually, as the timeline splits in the background, and she looks down on it, like, she realizes that he was telling the truth. And she realizes her mistake, but it's too late at that point.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that it's totally within her character to want to and to even eventually kill He Who Remains. What I had issue with was the fact that she was calling out Loki for having selfish and different motives than he was saying. Right? That's for the example you said with Quill on Titan. When Tony Stark is then yelling at him, like, hey, Quill, cut it out, like, we almost got this glove off him, like, take it easy, man. That's like if Quill turned to Stark and was like, oh, like, so you hate Gamora now too, or something like that. You're an accomplice in all of this, right? Then turning on an ally who's just saying, take a second and think about it, and then assigning the motive to them. That was the issue that I had. Not the fact that she killed him. I mean, that's totally within character. That makes total sense. Like I said, and like you said, her whole life has been essentially determined for her, and she has had no real independence and has been hunted down her whole life. So that all totally makes sense that she would be emotional and out of control. But it's when she turns to someone that is supposed to be her closest ally and someone she trusts and apparently loves, and then assigns the improper motive to him, then it's just that ability of hers to trust, or at least to trust one person, that gets thrown out the window that I had some issue with. Like, of course she was going to go out of control. So maybe if there was a scenario where he, steps in and is like, hey, let's think about it for a second, and she's like, it doesn't matter, I want to kill him, like, I don't care what the right move is, this is my whole life's work. Like, something like that would have made total sense. But when she started accusing Loki of wanting the throne for himself, that was the part that I had the issue with. And I'm not even mad at her for having killed Kang, or He Who Remains, whatever we want to refer to him as. I'm not even mad about that. I was much more mad about Quill. This was just so exciting because it opens so many things for the universe. I'm like, it has to happen. Just do it, whatever. Like, that part was great. I had no issues with that.
Yeah, that's the thing here, is that we're not really too mad that she made a horrible decision because now this
Oh,
gives
yeah.
us exactly what we wanted. And
Yeah.
I hate to toot our own horns too much, but we were so right about Kang.
I
Oh,
will.
I even mentioned Immortus and the He Who Remains last episode. Oh, I want to just give
Well
myself
done.
a round of applause, pat
Well
myself
done.
in the back. Obviously, the clues were there for many people to get it, so it's not like we're the only ones to sniff this out.
Mhm.
But I am very glad that Marvel laid clear a trail
Mhm.
here for a villain that hadn't been introduced, and they introduced him here. There were, again, hints towards Mephisto and other potential characters in WandaVision that never materialized, and I think a lot of people took that maybe a little bit too far with their disappointment, but I'm definitely glad that Kang / He Who Remains, I'm just going to call him Kang here, because He Who Remains is a mouthful. But Kang, yes, the one at the end of time here. And we find out that essentially this is a version of Kang. Well, I'll just try to tell a story here. I'll do a brief synopsis for people who are not educated. Kang is born Nathaniel Richards in the 31st century. He's a long ways down the line descendant of Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four. And Nathaniel Richards discovers basically interdimensional travel and some time travel as well. I'm not exactly sure on his exact power specifications, but he has technology that's so far in the future that it's essentially magic. So it's indistinguishable for us at this point, the technology that he has capabilities of. At the same time that he's discovering other dimensions and other timelines, there are other versions of himself discovering other timelines and dimensions as well. And not all of them are super friendly. So essentially there's this multiversal war where all these different versions of Kang are fighting each other, trying to conquer different timelines based on their varying degrees of evilness, I guess. And this one here that ends up in our story is the one that was able to end the multiversal war by taming and weaponizing Alioth, the temporal smoke monster we saw last episode. And basically, he used that to be the garbage disposal for other timelines. So, by creating the TVA and pruning alternate timelines where other versions of himself could pop up down the line and then wreak havoc on other timelines and just cascade that way. The TVA prunes potential timelines where Kangs could exist, and then anything in them is sent to the void where Alioth just devours it essentially and destroys it. So that's been his scheme for a long time, and it's really interesting because we don't actually, we expect to find this big mustache twirling villain at the end of this long journey here on an asteroid outside of time and space, basically. What we actually find is one of the more, this is interesting, I wanted to say almost one of the more benevolent versions of Kang, but is the one that conquers all the other conquerors and keeps them from existing, any more benevolent than the ones that just wanted to conquer and rule the others? I don't know. But essentially his explanation is that he's keeping the sacred timeline together to prevent evil versions of himself from wreaking havoc in the multiverse. And that's why the TVA exists. That's why things get pruned. So protecting the multiverse from yourself is either the most or least noble thing somebody can do.
Yeah, and or at least Sylvie takes clear issue with that. Loki does as well. Just the idea that it's like, okay, he's in charge, but the way he's choosing to prevent future or separate versions of himself from showing up is essentially what Captain America in Winter Soldier was fighting against, which of course Shield ended up being infiltrated by Hydra, but the idea of having the guns to everyone's head in the world to eliminate threats prematurely is essentially what Kang is doing. And so just on a timeline
He's
level,
minority reporting himself.
yeah, just on a timeline level. And so, in order to prevent some major future catastrophe, he's ending lives well before they should be. And so, there can be an ethical argument. It's like, if that's for the greater good, at what point is it worth it, or is it ever worth it to sacrifice innocent people to prevent something greater? And in the Winter Soldier, the answer is no. And they kind of kill the nuance there by making Hydra infiltrate.
We don't trade lives.
Yeah, well, they kind of, ruin the nuance in Winter Soldier by having Hydra infiltrate, and so it ended up, of course, being super evil. But before we knew that was happening, it was a really interesting question, which I think most people would side on the team of, let freedom be and deal with the consequences. At least most Americans. But here Kang is like in a similar situation where he is chosen, and it's clearly effective, at least to what he's trying to do, which is prevent other variants of himself from showing up and terrorizing, because he's the only one we've seen, so clearly it's been working. But is that the universe that they want to live in? And I would say no, but a lot of people might have different opinions on that. We might very much get a Kang did nothing wrong, just like if there was the Thanos did nothing wrong type of online trend here. But
well, I think that's a little different because clearly, not only is that not true that Kang did nothing wrong, but Kang clearly has already done plenty wrong to get to this situation
Literally.
where there's a version of him that needs to stop all the other versions of him from existing. I mean, this is a guy that has basically unlimited power as far as we are aware in terms of time and space at this point. Like, he has he mentions to Loki and Sylvie that he's seen it all, like, infinite times over, basically. Like, he knows everything up until a certain point, which happens later in the episode, but he knows everything that's happened is happening and is going to happen because he's watched it all occur from his, space castle. So this is a little bit different because he already knows that there's versions of himself that will conquer if given the opportunity. And that seems a little slightly different to me than like the Winter Soldier, Minority Report situation where these people may commit a crime here, but they haven't yet. Like, he knows, and here's, I guess, is the problem when something exists outside of time, because, trying to pinpoint when exactly this happens is impossible. Like, the timeline fracturing means that it always has fractured. There wouldn't be like a specific point in 2023 in the Avengers timeline right now where like the timeline cracks starting at this moment. Like, this happening outside of normal time means that it has always happened, and the effects are like always out there, even through what we've seen.
Which meant that all of his work was just for useless if he ever was gonna die.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So this moment where Sylvie kills him was always gonna happen, and I mean, it's mind-bending to think about because he knows for a fact that other versions of himself will cause multiversal chaos if allowed to even exist. So he's sacrificing infinite timelines, I guess infinite -1 timelines to save the one. And if he lets the others prosper, they'll certainly destroy each other. So it's an interesting situation that he finds himself in. I got to agree, if not only, ethics aside, let me say that, but if not only just for the sake of future stories in the MCU, obviously wanted him to, be wrong and be killed and let the multiverse prosper. But clearly I also care about, those infinite potential lives that were just pruned, much less than the cool stories that are about to come in the future. But yeah, I mean, she kills him and we see the timeline branching out in the space behind them, and like, that means that infinite things can happen now, which is pretty crazy to think about.
Oh my goodness, there's so many possibilities for things. Like, as soon as I started seeing that timeline start branching, I just had so many thoughts fill my head of things that could happen in the MCU. My first thought was just, in order to beat Kang or multiple versions of Kang, there's definitely going to need to be multiple versions of all of the Avengers, which of course, we know that Spider-Man is going to have the other Spider-Man as well in it, and that's just specific circumstance because there hasn't been any other Iron Man movies or there hasn't been any other Doctor Strange movies outside of the MCU. So, of course, there's a specific circumstance with Spider-Man that allows for that. But there's definitely going to be multiple copies, probably played by the same actors, but maybe they'll get different actors to play Thor and to play Doctor Strange and to play whoever else.
Matt Damon Loki is coming back
from these different universes.
I guarantee you.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Who knows? Like, there's so many possibilities. Like, maybe we're gonna see Chris Hemsworth acting with Chris Hemsworth. Maybe we're gonna see Fat Thor with Fit Thor. Like, in order to help take down Kang. Like, there's gonna have to be collaboration, like almost Injustice style. Obviously, not the same as Injustice, which is a DC storyline where something along these lines happens where versions have to hop to a different universe to fight along themselves. But that would be, there's so many possibilities for things to do. And like you said, we don't know exactly when this timeline split happens, which was a little bit confusing to me because he says, I knew everything up to this point. Kang says, this is the point that I don't know. But since their little castle thing is outside of time, how is there a point at which it like passes? That was confusing to me, especially because they're at the end of time anyway. Or they had been and they stepped out of that. So that part confused me. I don't care. I'm just going to hand wave it away.
Well, so that confused me for a second as well. But so the way that I thought about that scene is, yes, he exists outside of time, but he still experiences things in real time. Like things still happen over the course of time. Like even in the TVA, they exist outside of time. But Mobius, clearly mentioned to Loki earlier, he was like, when there's a Nexus event, we have to go in real time. And things happen in a sequence.
Yeah, you walk somewhere, you eat something. Like
they have the timeline splits somewhere, and they have to go have a real time response to that. Like things still happen sequentially, so he's still experiencing some sort of sequence.
Yeah.
In order for him to not know what happens next, like he's again, it's ridiculous to think about because it just melts the brain, but. Yeah. That confused me a little bit as well, but until I thought about it that way. And now that I'm explaining it, it's confusing me even more, so maybe I should stop explaining it and just not think about it. But, yeah, he hits that threshold, which was a really cool scene. He just has this weirded out facial expression on his face as he has some moments of uncertainty for the first time in eons, probably.
Yeah, well, when that happened, my first thought was that he, heard something, because he stopped and, turned his head. My first thought was that he heard something like maybe another version of himself was just now coming, and had escaped or something. And my thought was that had happened, which that didn't end up being the case. But it was still, like you said, a super, super cool scene seeing him realize, I don't know what's going to happen for the first time ever. But like I'd been saying, we don't know when the timeline splits, which it must have been at the very least before or around the time of Infinity War. Because when Doctor Strange is on Titan and he does his go into the future thing, if it was a perfect timeline, and if at that point it was a sacred timeline that was uniform, then there wouldn't be 14 million potential futures. Depending on how far in the future he looked, of course. But if he was looking to the end of the conflict, because it says he looks ahead to the end of the coming conflict, which was not too far ahead. It was 5 years and change. Then there, if it was a sacred timeline with one outcome, like Kang was keeping it, there wouldn't have been 14 million potential outcomes because the time zone would have just traveled on that. So clearly it was different writers, different directors, so they might have just had different interpretations of the timeline. And again, you got to hand wave some stuff.
No, I think the answer there is that every single future that he saw that they didn't win, they just got pruned because they were supposed to always win at the end. So they did exactly what was supposed to happen. He saw a bunch of TVA agents marching in and vaporizing everybody.
It breaks off slightly, get pruned, breaks off slightly, gets pruned, breaks off slightly. That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, I love Infinity War, but that line, I mean, it's very dramatic, and it
It's a little goofy.
I think it makes the movie better. That it's like this is the only way things can happen. It gives it more dramatic stakes in a movie that definitely doesn't need any more drama. But it is like a little just like get off our case. Like this is the GTFO.
It takes away the agency of the. It takes away the agency of all the characters.
Anything that happens in this movie, you can't even say anything about it because it had to happen that way because Doctor Strange saw it.
Well, it's like because you wrote Doctor Strange to say that.
And if there's any flaws, you just say that Doctor Strange meant for that to happen. Yeah, it's 100% foolproof.
Man, maybe if they added something like that in The Last Jedi, people wouldn't have hated it so much. Just kidding. It was still terrible.
Oh my god.
But
we will, if we ever have a podcast episode talking about the new Star Wars movies,
it'll be bad.
That will be like a 3-hour just rant session.
We'll have to do the good things first,
that movie,
and then have the negatives afterwards.
Don't even get me started because I will just get furious.
Either way, regardless.
Yeah, we'll have about 30 seconds of good stuff, and it'll be Babu Frick.
Honestly,
and
Babu Frick is a legend.
Silence. And then it'll be 4 hours of just gutting the once proud Star Wars franchise. Anyways, that's completely off topic, and you got me going.
We can go off topic sometimes. It's fine. Don't prune this timeline, man. We don't have to stick to the script. We can diverge a little bit. But yeah, there's so many possibilities coming up, and it's so hype. And I'm really curious as to which actual future MCU things are going to touch on this. Because, like, Hawkeye, I really doubt they're going to go into any of this there, which this kind of makes Hawkeye seem, I mean, a lot of people joke that he's already insignificant, but things like this, it's like, what on earth is Hawkeye possibly supposed to do about any of this that's going on? Nothing. He just exists in one timeline, and maybe someone who's way more powerful will help him transition to a different one to do something at some point. But it's like, we'll definitely have to set aside this whole multiverse idea for a lot of the shows coming up. Even ones that have much stronger characters like She-Hulk and Moon Knight and things like that, even them much stronger than Hawkeye are still going to have, no ability to do anything about this or impact the multiverse unless someone more powerful steps in and transfer them to a different timeline or something, which that's totally fine. Everything doesn't have to be on this massive scale. It'll be really nice to have small scale stories and, it's about the characters, and if you can follow them and enjoy them, it's just funny, and it's interesting to think about, okay, well, now that I know this is the possibility, I'm looking ahead at every single upcoming MCU project, and I'm like, which one of these are going to have multiversal implications? Some of them are obvious, like Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man and the Wasp 3. Some of them are very clearly going to have, talk about this multiverse idea. But for a lot of them, I'm like, man, is this going to be in there? Or are they going to avoid it? Or will it just be touched on briefly? And I've been going through all of them just trying to rack my brain and think about it. And it's been fun. It's been fun speculating. I'm so excited for these upcoming things. That was probably my biggest excitement from the episode.
Yeah, I think one of the big aspects that Marvel gains here that is getting overlooked is versatility. Now, when you have, I think, kind of 3 distinct levels to your cinematic, well, I can't even call it a cinematic universe anymore, cinematic multiverse. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to continue to call it the MCU. The MCU now has 3 distinct tiers on which it operates. It has the earthly, grounded heroes and stories that we saw recently with Black Widow, Hawkeye, you have the Captain Americas, you have your Sam Wilsons, your Bucky Barnes, your Zemos, spy stuff, rogue governments, espionage.
Even Black Panther.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff happening on Earth, happening in the main timeline. No longer the sacred timeline, but certainly still the one we know and love with the prior stories. And then you have kind of the outer space gang, for lack of a better word, where you have Guardians, you have Thor, you have, well, I guess, Iron Man counted as he was out on Titan. But you have these characters that are able to go to like other planets and other realms. And then thirdly, you're gonna have just like the cosmic tier, which is gonna be characters like Kang, Doctor Strange, Wanda,
The Eternals coming up.
insane characters that, yep, Eternals are gonna be on this level where they have just ridiculous power and deal with the multiversal threats that are going on and impact, multiple timelines at once. And I think, not that it was an issue in the past, because Marvel definitely has done some genre jumping, from Ant-Man's heist movie to Winter Soldier's spy action thriller. They have multiple different genres represented. I know people like to say that Marvel movies are all cookie cutter and formulaic, and to some degree they are, but I think upon multiple watches you can really see how different each individual entry can be from one another. Now, that's what I like about where the MCU is going forward here. The different layers upon which they can have multiple different stories is going to be awesome for them, as they can tell several different stories and several big arcs on different levels without having to feel like you have to shoehorn in, 1,000 characters into every movie. There's no reason that Hawkeye or, Yelena or Red Guardian will like show up in Eternals, but you wouldn't expect them to because they're not on that level. And there's no reason that you would expect Eternals to show up in like Black Widow. Like there's zero reason for them to have any impact there.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can have these smaller team ups
Mm-hmm.
that are more feasible to be done and have them at different levels of strength and, I guess, universal impactfulness, and gives you a little bit more free reign to be a little bit looser with the genres as well, as you have wildly different spheres of operation. You can do basically whatever you wanted for all three levels. But yeah, that's what I'm excited about. Honestly, moving forward here is the versatility that Marvel will have at their fingertips.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That was something that I had as one of my criticisms of Phase 3, especially of the MCU. Especially once you got to Infinity War and Endgame, which I love those movies to death, of course. But there were definitely issues in them where it was just really awkward. Like in the whole Infinity War, not the Infinity War, the whole Endgame ending battle, like Doctor Strange opens up the portals, brings everyone through, right? And then he essentially has to spend the whole fight just holding back water. Like they have to power him down so much because he's so strong that he'll just wipe out like the entire army by himself and Thanos by himself, essentially. And so they just have to.
Yeah, Wong could have definitely held back that water, and Doctor Strange could have been helpful.
Yeah,
he could have ended the thing immediately.
Yeah, and then they have
had to take him out of it.
And then they have to turn Hulk into Professor Hulk and have him like lose all his aggression and a lot of his strength. They have to have Vision in Infinity War just get taken out really easily, even though he's vibranium and super strong and has an Infinity Stone. They have to have all these people.
Thor get fat and slow.
Yeah, fat,
they have to power down all these
people.
Characters.
But then it's not even consistent because Scarlet Witch is there dominating, and Captain Marvel shows up and just nukes an entire ship. And so it's just weird because it was like trying to balance characters that really have no business, being on the same field of battle. When Captain Marvel or Doctor Strange can take out the whole army by themselves, and then Hawkeye is there as well. It's like they have to give him something to do. So it just led to these weird power levelings, which makes sense for the movie. You need to make everyone contribute, which totally makes sense. But I really think you're making a good point about now there's these separate kind of domains of not only like physically where they are, but just power levels. And so I'm really hoping that they keep those kind of separate. I'm sure there will be one massive team up event down the line, maybe some type of multiversal war that will just lead to everybody having to do anything, like all hands on deck type of deal. But I'm hoping, like, if they try to take the Eternals and mix it with Hawkeye and Black Widow, the new Black Widow, then it's just like, why? What's the point? You're either going to have to level them down so much that they change their characters as a whole, or you'll just have to kill off the other people immediately, or just make them do nothing. And so I really hope that for the most part they do keep them relatively separate. Maybe, of course, they're going to interact in some ways. They'll have to. But I think you're making a really good point. Just keeping them somewhat separate. So that way, the big hitters can do their big hitter things and have crazy mind-bending abilities. And it totally works. And they don't have to get powered down at all. Just for the sake of the other characters. And that makes other characters look better too. Like, it makes Hawkeye look better when, it's not like, oh, the only reason he can hang is because they powered down the other person. That just doubles down on how lame he is. It's like, no, he's out there doing what he's able to do and being a boss at it. And he's not having to be compared to all these crazy cosmic beings, essentially. So I think it's just a good direction for them to go. And I hope, like you said, that they, for the most part, keep them relatively separate. Although, again, I'm sure that there's going to be more things where they'll have triple the amount of characters that Endgame did and just insanity. Hopefully that's a show at some point whenever that does happen, just so they can have as much screen time as possible to fit that all in. But I would be surprised. It'll probably just be like a 2-part movie again or something like that. So, yeah, but just so many possibilities that this opens up. And I mean, we thought there was a lot of characters before. We're about to just get hit by so many, and so many versions of the same ones too. It's just going to be off the wall. It's insane.
Yeah, see, that has to be the payoff for, Avengers 10 or whatever comes down the line. The portal scene, but not just with all the heroes we know, but with every version of all the heroes that we know. And it's just infinite heroes.
And bring back like Iron Man and Cap, like Steve Rogers from a different timeline. Like, I would be totally shocked if they never come back.
I'll probably cry in the theater if that happened.
At some point, they're gonna make some sort of a cameo. I cannot imagine a world where they open up the idea of time travel and multiverse hopping and don't have them come back for at least a cameo at some point.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
I mean, maybe it exists, but I mean, that would be the loudest audience applause. Louder than any moment. Louder than Cap picking up Mjolnir.
Yeah.
In Endgame.
It would be.
Like, just absolutely.
I think they do have to let their deaths
we'll
and sacrifices simmer for a little bit. Bringing them back too early would absolutely undercut the moment.
For sure.
Even now, it's been multiple years since those movies came out, and it's still crazy. Yeah, over 2 years since Endgame came out at this point.
That's crazy.
And yeah, it still feels like it would be too soon, like way too soon. I'm thinking like a decade down the line.
Absolutely.
Maybe bring him back for a final battle. They do the classic, combo moves where he does the arc reactor shot off the shield and he beams it around.
Off the shield.
Yeah. Oh, that would get the crowd going 100%. But yeah, I mean, there's unlimited potential for what we could see in the future. So, we're joking about stuff right now, but we could absolutely see anything happen here.
Yeah, and especially because after Endgame and then after this series specifically, definitely more so than the last two. After this series specifically, we know that Marvel is plenty happy to give fan service to their fans. Sometimes they try to do quirky, subvert expectations, like with WandaVision and Iron Man 3, with the Mandarin and things like that. But they also are totally willing to just dive all in on the fan service at times too. And so, with things like that makes me I would not be surprised if crazy things like that happen down the line. Steven, we've been talking about looking forward a lot. I would be interested to hear your thoughts looking back a little bit. You said earlier that you think that this was, I don't remember exactly how you said it, either the best of the finales or just different from the other finales. How would you rate this just as a finale to Loki compared with WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and why?
I'd have to say it's the best one. I mean, I like the finales for all three. I think Falcon and the Winter Soldier is lowest for me, and I think as a whole, the show is the lowest of the three for me as well. Um, it had a lot of good stuff in it, but the action was, pretty cookie cutter. Sam had a very sanctimonious speech at the end, which kind of went on too long and didn't have a real conclusion. I thought a lot of the social messages were potentially handled a little clumsily after a little bit further thought on it. And they had by far the weakest villain. Now, again, that's not to say I didn't enjoy the show or Falcon and Winter Soldier's finale as a whole, because I did. But those are the reasons why I think it's the weakest. WandaVision, I think, is a close second to Loki, and is only lowered by the fact that a potentially really, really cool battle between two supremely powerful witches turns into just like another space laser fight. I was a little bit disappointed in that, but overall, again, another excellent finale. And Loki had, no final battle. I mean, he and Sylvie tussle for a little bit, but it's not really anything, that I would call a final battle. And it's like 30 minutes of Jonathan Majors just expositing to us as Kang, or as He Who Remains. But I didn't care because I enjoyed every single minute of him talking. And I was just so happy to see the multiverse, expand and all the potential stories just literally branch out in front of our eyes. Like, again, I agree with you that this episode, in a vacuum is not the most exciting episode, but the implications of this episode are beyond exciting, like thrilling. This is the single most impactful, like, episode or 40-minute chunk of anything in the MCU up until this point, I think. Maybe the only other thing could be like the introduction of the Infinity Stones in, Phase 1, or, I guess you could say Doctor Strange or Guardians when they first get their proper introductions, but, like, this is now blowing those out of the water. And so I think this is, yeah, and then given, what we have already slated to come up, there's 10 potentially more movies in Phase 4, plus about a dozen TV shows that are slated to have come out or will be coming out. Like, Phase 4 is going to have more content than Phases 1 and 2 combined, and it's going to come out in about half the time.
Even more than the snap.
And so this is beyond impactful. Like, this is the craziest episode I've seen of anything in a long time. And, like, I just can't wait to see the fallout from it, essentially. Now, does that take away from it a little bit, that it's not the episode itself that's exciting, but the promise of what's to come? You can make that point. But, again, even still, we're, a few days after the episode's aired at this point, and I'm still blown away by what happened in this episode. Like, this was just fantastic stuff.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with the rankings and with everything you just said. I think, just the implications from this are so massive that I almost want to view Loki as like the prologue to the rest of Phase 4. Like, I can't imagine watching anything in Phase 4 without having seen this. Like, I just feel bad for people, the 10 people that still exist that don't have Disney Plus, or, the people that somehow skip out on this or are not huge Marvel fans but watch something down the line. You'll just be so completely lost. Like, if there's one series that you have to watch, if you don't watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you'll find out, oh, Sam's Cap now. Okay, great. It goes on. But if you don't watch this, nothing will make sense. Nothing will make any sense at all. And so I think this is the most essential of the three, although WandaVision definitely is going to be very essential. But I think this is the most essential of the three to have to watch, just as a series overall. And I agree with your ranking with the finales. Like you said, this one was very exposition heavy. It was mostly just a lot of talking and explaining things, and did not end super resolved. I mean, we find out that Sylvie kills He Who Remains, Kang, and there was resolution there to that one specific variant of the one specific character. But then we see Loki get back to the quote unquote TVA, and we find out it's a different one from a different timeline, which I thought that it existed outside of the timeline. So I don't know how that
Well,
happened,
yeah,
but
I don't think it's necessarily a different TVA. What I think happened, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but as Sylvie kills He Who Remains, the timeline splits infinitely in the background, meaning there are already versions of Nathaniel Richards in the 31st century out to conquer. And by the time Loki gets back to the TVA, this is the TVA that has been created by a different version of Kang, one that is not so worried about hiding behind like the timekeepers or anything. We see the one big statue of him instead of the three timekeepers. And so this is one that clearly is just out to like rule time.
Yeah.
With an iron fist instead of, seemingly benevolently. So that was my interpretation of it. Not that she sent him, to the wrong TVA, but to a TVA that had been altered already by the time they got back.
Yeah, that's totally possible.
Set in motion immediately before.
Yeah, no, that's a really good theory. That's totally possible. I wasn't trying to necessarily comment on that. I was just saying, with Loki, it doesn't end, like, it doesn't get wrapped up in the finale. Like, it's left very open-ended, and there's not a whole conclusion. Even with Sylvie, even though she kind of finished her arc by killing He Who Remains, or Kang, whatever the heck we want to call him, she's still just stuck out in the middle of nowhere. Clearly, she's going to continue to be a character in the MCU. So, like, it didn't really wrap up perfectly in terms of, like, bringing everything to a conclusion. And it was very exposition heavy, not very much action at all. And I could not care less about any of that. That was literally exactly what I was hoping would come out of the episode. Like I said the last couple weeks, I was like, there's no possible way they can introduce someone this big and powerful to have set up the TVA and just literally control time. I mean, not like control time, but prune and determine what happens throughout history. Like, there's no way that can be resolved and set up in one episode. And so, I mean, like I was saying the last couple episodes, I was like, man, I just want this to set up for the future and introduce Kang and give us, him. And that's exactly what happened. And so I couldn't care less that it was maybe a bit slow, and I don't even think it was slow because it just flew by and you were so gripped the whole time, even though it was mostly just talking. This was literally everything that I was hoping would have come out of this episode, and it was just so fantastic. And I think it nailed, I mean, there were the issues that I stated at the beginning, but I think it nailed what was essential for it to nail. And I think it did the best job with the quote-unquote villain. If we say that Kang is the villain of this show, which, again, you could debate that. But I think it's set up that he's the villain, but with nuance to him. WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier both tried to add nuance, and I think both stumbled a little bit. Of course, we talked about and we really did not like the way that they handled the Flag Smashers in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, trying to tell us that they were good people while only showing us the terrible things that they did and giving us no real reason other than the characters saying it that we should like feel sympathy for them. And so that tried to have some nuance, and even more so by having Sam care a whole bunch about Carly at the end. Like that I think was handled a bit clumsily, and so that finale was okay. I thought it was alright, and there were parts of it that were absolutely tremendous, but overall was just kind of okay to good. And then with WandaVision, they tried to have the nuance with Wanda herself, having her be the cause of all of it and have to deal with her inner demons and everything, and kind of have her be the villain. And then in the end, they just like the line where Agatha tells her that none of these people know what you had to sacrifice for them, and then try to make her the good guy after all of it, when it just made absolutely no sense after she had literally kidnapped all of them. That was just like, what? So again, with both the other ones, the nuance of the main antagonizing force really didn't land super well. not that everyone has to be perfectly nuanced. I mean, sometimes it's good to just have an evil bad guy to beat up. But when they try to go for it and don't quite hit it, it's like it's okay. It's fine. They tried, but it's not the most gripping thing ever. With Kang, I think they absolutely nailed that because I was sitting there thinking, I have no clue what I would do in this situation. I mean, like I said earlier, I think I would err on the side of freedom of decision making over like perfect security. But that doesn't mean that I would necessarily in that moment like make that active decision to go and kill this dude to allow that to happen if I was Loki, right? And it's just like it leads to such good conversation and they handled it so well by having him explain and you're even while he's explaining you're not totally sure if he's fully telling the truth or if he's trying to protect himself or if he's trying to get in their heads or like he was handled so well and Jonathan Majors does such a good job acting as him. You're just totally sucked in and like even they have the two main characters, Loki and Sylvie, like in conflict about it and it made sense that they would be. I mean, it didn't make sense exactly how they did like I said earlier in my opinion, but like it was handled so well, especially compared to the other ones. And I'm like, that's how you do a nuanced villain. That's how you do a nuanced, like, get your mind going. Like, that was the difference between Thanos in Infinity War versus Thanos in Endgame. And, oh man, it leaves me so excited. And I don't expect every version of him coming up to be like that because some of them will just be purely antagonistic, I'm sure. Which, I mean, I'm sure we're going to meet a lot of different versions of him as well. So even if there's one version in one movie, we'll probably get a different version in Quantumania and probably a different version in whatever. And so it might be kind of challenging like jumping between personalities or whatever with different versions of Kang that show up. But that's just what's exciting and I don't know, I think they nailed his introduction even though it was a lot of talking. I was just totally blown away by this episode and especially compared to the other two finales. It just goes to show not every finale just has to be a big fight. Like, it doesn't have to be a big action piece in order to be gripping and to bring solid closure to a series. And it doesn't even have to bring solid closure because this one didn't at all. And it was still fantastic.
I was gonna say this didn't have to do any of that because it's not actually the end of the series. It's only the end of season one.
True.
We got no end credit scene this week, which I was shocked at. Frankly, I cannot believe that they didn't give us a follow up to all the stuff.
The whole show was an end credit scene.
Basically, but yeah. So we got the confirmation that Loki season 2 is coming out. No release date yet.
It probably won't be for a while.
This is something you gotta wonder: is now this going to take place out of time, or is this going to fit into the events that are going to happen with other movies and shows that are releasing? If this affects those, you certainly would think that it would come out sooner, instead of in the middle. And given the events to happen at the end of this episode, you would think that you would want to follow that up immediately. But with no release date on the horizon, it'd be interesting to see where this comes out and what role it plays in the story. But yeah, after Loki season 1 finale, I can say that I'm probably more excited for the future of the MCU than I've ever been.
Yeah, I totally agree. I saw online somewhere that Loki was initially supposed to be twice as long, and with the pandemic, they had to cut it into 2 seasons. I think that's totally unconfirmed. So if you see that, I don't necessarily think that that's fully accurate, but it might be. So I wouldn't take that and start spreading around like it's totally the truth, but it's also possible because I know the other shows had to do reshoots and film things weird and cut some things because of the pandemic as well. So it's possible. But yeah, I mean, that show, there's just no time in the schedule for like another 2 years or a year and a half at least. So before they can fit that in, which, it'll happen. So,
well, that's just something that they definitely didn't announce already because they would have spoiled that, prior to the beginning of the season. So they probably have it on the docket and they just have not, announced its date in the midst of the other releases. But we'll be looking forward to it when it comes out. Up next, we got well, Shang-Chi is the next release in September, but in the theaters. But we have What If in August, and Justin still needs to see Black Widow.
Yes, I do.
And yeah, that's all happening within the next 2 months. So
Steve,
again, I was harping on earlier how rough it feels waiting, this interim couple weeks between the shows or movie releases at this point. So as I'm saying it feels really greedy just talking about all the things that are coming up, and we have like 30 new properties getting released in the next like 3 years, which is nuts. But I just want it all right.
We'll just have to switch our podcast.
I'll be greedy about it. I
We'll
don't
just
care.
have to switch our podcast name to Greedy Brothers instead of Two Brothers, or two.
I like it.
Two babies crying for more.
Put
content.
that on a hoodie.
But yeah, no, we'll upload our thoughts and predictions for What If probably in a couple weeks here before it actually comes out. We'll upload we'll think about our schedule for uploading and what we want to talk about before What If comes out. But Steve, real quick, just as a sneak peek into our predictions about What If, do you think it's going to be fully canon?
I am going to say yes. It is narrated by the Watcher, and I think it's going to be from the perspective of him looking at alternate timelines to see how things that were almost the same in our main timeline were changed with one slight difference. And I think they will find a way to make them canon, even though they're animated. I think that'll just be a stylistic choice by the Watcher to show us them in that format. But that's my prediction, is that they will be canon, which is a nice surprise after we thought we were just getting, a bunch of one-off, shorts essentially, which would have been fine with also. But now that the multiverse is out and confirmed and active prior to What If being released, I think that there's a very good chance that it's canon.
Yeah. Makes sense. We will see. We'll see. I wouldn't be shocked either way.
We'll come back to talk about What If in a bit.
We'll have some more predictions and talk about it, and yeah. So it'll be great.
I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a real fun show with hopefully not as much, dramatic tension and week to week heart palpitations as Loki was giving me. So I'm very much looking forward to What If, and we're looking forward to chatting about it.
Absolutely, man. Hey, August is gonna be great. It'll be so great,
yes,
and
sir.
especially in August, man. Just for everyone listening, I'm not gonna sound as tired because I'll be back in the States, so I will be recording at a normal time, probably around 5 or 5:30, whenever we make it work, as opposed to 11:30 to 2 or whatever we've been doing now. So I will be less tired. I will be less sniffly because I'll be in the warm instead of the middle of winter. And it'll be great. So hopefully that helps tighten some things up and makes a little bit of the editing quicker. But yeah, no, it's been exciting. And this was episode 13, Steve, man. We're flying through
Lucky number 13.
Lucky number 13, yeah. We're not putting this out on a Friday. That's the 13th, right? No, there's no Friday the 13th coming up soon.
Oh, goodness. I hope not. I don't want to have some 7 years bad luck or whatever the heck happens.
The 13th's not for a long time, so we're good. But, yeah, man. Well, it'll be exciting, and I cannot wait for what's coming next. And I'm sure we'll have more thoughts on Loki. We might talk about those on a later date as well, if more things come to mind. But fantastic series. What would you just give the series as a whole a rating? Now that you've seen the whole thing.
On the Marvel scale, this is tough. I've had a hard time rating each of these series, as I was very high on all of them immediately, and then in retrospect, my feelings have not necessarily gotten worse on all of them, but they've changed as I've thought about them more and more. I think it's still too fresh for me to I think it's still too fresh for me to put Loki at an exact spot in my rankings, but I could probably give it a solid 8.5 upon first watch.
For context.
I don't know where.
For context, what else do you have at 8.5?
8.5 out of 10.
Well,
sorry.
No. Well,
8.5 out of 10. Well, that's the thing, is for context, I don't know exactly. I gotta take a look at my list.
I was gonna say, what else would you have around that?
where I put everything up
around that?
here. I would probably put it in the same tier as. Well, this is not going to make any sense to anybody who hasn't seen my list. I keep a very detailed tier list, and ordered tier list of the MCU films up to this point. I have not added any of the TV shows because I will need a second rewatch to get them fully into my rankings. But I'd probably say this is potential top 10 Marvel property for me. I wouldn't say it's top 5. Potentially watching the whole show as one big movie will change that and could have top 5 potential. But I'd say back half of the top 10 is what I'm looking at right now. This was excellent stuff.
Wow, it's very high. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine would be high as well. I do not have as comprehensive of a listing. Maybe that can be our next episode or one of our next ones.
Yeah, we'll have to do an episode where we tier list everything. Everybody loves tier lists. We can put some buzzwords in the algorithm and make us recommend.
There we go. If we do all MCU content ranked exclamation points, and we do a face on the thumbnail that's like us doing like a crazy face. No one listening can see that. I just you open your mouth, you do a big like shocked face.
Yeah, never do that again. Also, that was horrific.
Well, that's just my face, so I won't apologize for that.
But yeah, we'll have to throw a bunch of keywords in there so the algorithm can pick us up and make us famous. But we'll talk about that on a future episode. We'll rank all the Marvel stuff. Probably have to do it soon because the longer we wait, the more things there will be to rank. And maybe we'll just have to do the Infinity Saga, and we'll do that, and then we'll do Phase 4 when it's done, and so on. But we'll get around to it. We'll do what we want when we want. So
that's the great thing.
Figure it out on the fly, and you guys will get to listen to whatever we decide to talk about. So
thanks for listening. If you are musically talented, again, $5 is available for literally like a 20-second theme song.
That's a whole Abraham Lincoln bill.
A decade ago would have got you a footlong at Subway. Now it would get you about I don't know, maybe a salad at Subway. Probably not even, like a soda at Subway. But still, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Thanks for the inflation.
Yeah.
Love that.
Jeez.
Anyways, gotta end it before I go ranting off about other stuff. But thanks for listening. We'll be back with more episodes in the future. But for now, this was the finale of Loki Season 1.
It's great. If you haven't seen it, I don't know why you listened this far, but go watch it.
Yeah, if you made it this far and you listened to us describe the entire episode, and you don't go watch it now, like, there's no hope for you. So, go watch it. If you've seen it, go watch it again, because it was awesome, and it deserves multiple watches. Probably to understand everything that's happening, but...
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll be back to talk about more of this in the future, and we'll see you guys then.
Deuces.
Peace!